Great. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from Thomas Huddleston, who's going to talk about the work that he's doing with JCARR and the work that he's done with immigration all over the world, or well, Europe and America, maybe other places. It's nice to see everyone here, especially people from JCARR and the community who we don't always see on our Zooms. So welcome to our Becky Zoom Schmooze. I'm going to introduce our speaker. Thomas Huddleston is living in Connecticut and Vermont, and I'll let him tell you how that works. And he's currently volunteering to support JCARR, and he's working to develop new co-sponsorship groups in Brattleboro, Vermont. Over the past 15 years, he has provided international research and advice through the Migration Policy Group, a leading European think tank. He organized studies, campaigns, and community sponsorship initiatives as part of Europe's refugee welcome movement in response to the Syrian civil war. Thomas can also speak to his own personal experiences of the challenges and rewards of sponsorship, participating in European community sponsorship schemes. Currently, as I mentioned, he's working with JCARR on the recruitment and training of new volunteers to join the team to welcome a new Afghan refugee family who is here. How long have they been here at this point? Can someone speak to that? Maddie, do you know how long has the family been here? Can you unmute? Well, I'm sure.
I think October. I think
October. So they've been here.
October, and they were living with the brother-in-law. I don't know whose brother-in-law it is, whether it's his brother-in-law or her brother-in-law.
Oh, but they have somebody here who they were able to.
That's why I think they came to New Haven.
Yes.
They were originally in Virginia. The family was, I think, to an army base in Virginia.
Right.
New Haven.
So these, obviously Thomas has direct experience and has for many years, so he's going to be able to share some of his wisdom with us. And I think what we'll do is hold your questions to the end, and we'll leave time at the end for a question and answer. And thank you very much for being here, Thomas. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
All right, well, evening to everyone from Becky. So thrilled to share what JCARR is doing as also part of a bigger picture of how the United States is rebuilding its commitment to welcome refugees. What I wanted to do in this first section was give you an idea of what is this bigger picture, of what we are having to do to rebuild a welcome, particularly for our Afghan allies. And then talk a bit about how JCARR contributes to that, and then end with a little bit on how you contribute to that. So the context that we're in right now is that the previous administration really tried to put an end to the United States' commitment and capacity to legally welcome refugees and even asylum seekers to this country. And one of the ways that they did that was, as you remember, with the Muslim ban and the refugee ban, and many minute procedural changes made it virtually impossible for the United States to continue its decades-long tradition of refugee resettlement. So even though the United States, since the Second World War, has been really the leader in getting countries to create refugee resettlement, it has had to go back on its own promise. And what that meant was that in the previous fiscal year, so up until September of 2021, the United States only resettled 9,000 people in need of protection, which is abysmal. It is, the lowest on record. And what that meant also was that the whole sector that is welcoming refugees was also completely decimated. So organizations are all around the country are part of refugee resettlement. They're part of the 9 federal resettlement agencies that are recognized by the State Department and work with the State Department. And they all have local affiliates like IRIS here in New Haven. Well, under the previous administration, those organizations lost about 80% of their staff because they were not able to resettle refugees. So all of this expertise that existed across the United States was destroyed. So the election brought back a commitment to refugee resettlement, and the current Biden administration set the annual cap of the number of refugees that could come legally into the country, back to the very ambitious levels that we had under the Obama administration. So for the fiscal year, September 2021 to 2022, the goal was to resettle 125,000 refugees from the rest of the world. And again, this is still a tiny percentage of those people in need. The UN Refugee Agency every year identifies people who need to be resettled around the world because there's no prospects of them going back to their home country. And the place where they are is not offering them any chance to build up a life. They're living in refugee camps, they're living in authoritarian neighboring countries, they have particular vulnerabilities, they need a place to go. And every year, governments all come together, they look at these numbers, they think long and hard, and they accept 1% of those people to go to a third country like the United States. So the United States was returning back to its traditional refugee resettlement scheme. And already that was going to be a huge challenge for a sector that lost 80% of its staff and all of its funding. But then we had the failed evacuation of Afghanistan, where for years, the United States recognized that people who had been working with the United States, with our NATO allies, with international actors, were targets of the Taliban regime because these were people bringing democracy and peace to Afghanistan. And their lives were already in danger before Afghanistan collapsed, which is why the Congress created the Special Immigrant Visa Program, the SIV program, that would allow you, if you worked for 2 years for the United States or one of their contractors, to immigrate to the United States. So that program as well was attacked by the previous administration, so that all of these people who needed to flee and were our allies were not able to come to the United States. So the Biden administration tried to restore that program, also recognizing that we were requiring the most ridiculous requirements for people to prove that they worked with a contractor for 2 years and needed all their pay stubs and needed their supervisor. So there were so many people who couldn't meet those requirements. The administration was trying to create different exemptions and other procedures, but no one foresaw that the Taliban would be able to resurge so quickly. And we all saw the scenes of Kabul airport. So as a result, the United States had to evacuate people, and other of our allies had to evacuate people however they could. The United States made agreements with countries all around the world to try and just house people temporarily there. And eventually, a number of them were able to come to US military bases in the United States. So the US ended up admitting around 80,000 people and said, well, either these are people who were eligible for the special immigrant visa, which gives them a very clear path to a green card and citizenship, or we're not sure what their legal status is because we lost our ability to have a legal immigration system. We had to evacuate these people. We're going to have to sort this out here in the United States, which meant that any of these Afghans would be able to have humanitarian parole in the United States. And that's parole means what you think it means. It means we're not going to jail you. You're not going to be detained. So eventually, these 80,000 Afghans were going to be able to find a place to stay in the United States, but they still have to sort out their legal status in the next 2 years. So all of that has happened, as Maddie was saying, August, September, October, November, military bases in the United States had 80,000 people in situations that were not meant to house civilians. Talking to some of our new neighbors, people were living 50, 500 people in a tent, with very poor insulation. I mean, one family was telling me how they were constantly trying to air it out so they wouldn't get COVID, but at the same time, then their children were freezing cold. It was not, the government thought that very quickly they would be able to relocate people off these US military bases and into American society. So you had resettlement agencies like IRIS that not only were going to be resettling 125,000 refugees from around the world, but also 80,000 Afghan allies. So they were going to have to scale up from resettling 9,000 people in 1 year to around 9,000 people every week. So that's what this sector has been going through and is still going through. So as stressful and as difficult as this is, we have to remember that this is how we live out our values. If we want the United States to be a welcoming place, that's not just about, you know, our political opinions or our donations. It is also really about what we are willing to do to repair and rebuild this country as a country of immigration. So what has that meant? Again, bigger picture. Well, you know, some of you might be familiar with traditional refugee resettlement, the families that JCARR has been supporting in the past. And so, you know, what that means is that most of these people have been waiting for years to be resettled in a country. They've been preparing their documents for ages. They get that lucky call that they're coming to the United States. They bring together all of their belongings, all of their savings. They are able to bring their core family with them. And everything is well organized from abroad, all of the health and safety checks. They get all this pre-arrival information on the place that they're moving to. And when they fly from that country to the United States, everything is ready for them, prepared by a local agency like IRIS and by its volunteers and partners, so that refugees can move into their apartment and, you know, from day one start in a very systematic way, getting signed up for all of the social support and health support and language learning, you know, on a regular basis, with families coming every few weeks in a well-organized system that eventually, you know, after 3 months or so, leads them to find employment, get signed up for all the support that they need, get their kids in school, and get on a path to getting a green card and eventually becoming a US citizen. And Jean shared with me today that actually one of the JCARR refugees, this week, just became a US citizen, right? So the failed emergency evacuation of our Afghan allies was anything but, and is anything but, traditional refugee resettlement. And that has an impact on not only organizations like IRIS, but also all of us who want to be supporting our allies. So, you know, first of all, the United States, when they're looking for refugees that will come to resettle, again, it's only that lucky 1%. And they're often looking at not only people who are tied to the United States with a family or connections here, but also people who are really vulnerable, right? People who can't make it in the country they're living in or can't make it back home. So the United States is able to really offer a humanitarian welcome. From what I've seen, those people who are able to access the Kabul airport are the most lucky because, you know, unlike our Ukrainian brothers and sisters, the borders were not open for Afghans, right? If you remember, Pakistan, Iran, they were closing their borders. No one was going to open up to Afghans whatsoever. So those relatively few people who were able to get out of Afghanistan, I see generally two profiles from the Afghan refugees that I've met up here in Vermont. Either they were the people who were protecting Kabul Air Force Base, which means that they really were our veterans. I mean, they were in the Army, in the Air Force, in the police, or they were the people connected enough in Afghan society to get access to Kabul Airport. meaning that, yes, they were working for the US or for NATO or for the Afghan government or had other special connections. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone here is a member of the elite. We have a very wide range of new neighbors. There are some people who are fluent in English and are highly skilled. There are other people who are highly skilled and didn't need English for their jobs. Doctors, lawyers, government officials. And then, of course, their families, where perhaps their spouse didn't need English for their job or took care of the children, or could be that they were an army veteran and maybe they were trained by the US, so they speak English. Maybe they were just a foot soldier. So these are a very lucky few, but what they all have in common is they all had to leave everything behind. So they are arriving often with the one suitcase that they were able to carry with them out of Kabul airport. Or if they were families, they got some donations on the US military bases, but that's not a lot to restart your life. They don't have their savings. They can't necessarily access money in Afghanistan. And what they all have in common is that they have all left behind core family members, which again is not the normal and easy way to restart your life in a new country. Because if you're going to go through the stress of learning a new language, humiliating yourself to realize you don't know anything about how the system works, and you're going to have to learn every single minute of every day. That's easier when you have your family there to support you. So when you leave your family behind, not only do you feel more isolated, but for our Afghan allies, the situation is atrocious in Afghanistan. So talking again to the newcomers that I've met, they are terrified of hunger for their family. Their family members are in hiding because the Taliban is looking for them, because someone in their family was so well connected to get out and get access to Kabul Air Force, so they must be an important person. They are terrified of the violence that their family members are facing. That's really hard to then spend all your energy learning English and learning how the bus works and planning for your job. Well, most families that I've met their top priority is to work and to start sending money home to their family members. They are really stressed. So we are now, past this kind of first phase of the Afghan placement program, the APA. What that means is that the US has been able to get everyone off of the US military base safe havens in the United States and get them into different communities around the United States. They've done all the processing, all the health checks, all the security checks, everything that would be normally done for refugee resettlement. They paid for their travel so that they could come to their new town. Again, it's not like traditional refugee resettlement because the Afghan American community is pretty concentrated. So about 80% of the Afghans who were on the US military bases, they had family or friends in one of four places: Sacramento, Houston, Seattle, and DC. Those are the areas where the Afghan American community exists. However, they all couldn't go there because the refugee resettlement agencies were just rebuilding in those places. And some of those places I listed are actually some of the least affordable places in the United States, with some of the least available housing, least government support. So many of our Afghan allies just had to go to a place where there was a spot available for them. And they weren't told, except a day or two before they were offered a flight out. You can leave the military base, but you've got to go to New Haven or Brattleboro. So they leave with very confused, very exhausted. And they have already been, as Maddie was saying, in the United States for 4 to 5 months on a military base where they weren't allowed to leave the military base. Some of them said, I don't really know where I was. Can you imagine 4 to 5 months not knowing where you were and being told that they don't know when you're going to leave and you can't do anything, right? So our new Afghan neighbors come really wanting life to begin again. very eager for things to start again. And, you know, they were told that we were all preparing for them. So they rightly expect that there's going to be an apartment, and there's going to be a job, and there's going to be a language course, and there's going to be financial support for them. And they, just 6 months ago, some of them were members of the Afghan elite. And they have not spent years acclimating to being a refugee and realizing what that's going to mean coming to the United States. So they're going through a really big shock to discover a country still struggling with a COVID recovery, with the runaway inflation, with the dysfunctional housing market. They really need support. They really need connections. So when they're here, you know, organizations like IRIS have been rebuilding their resettlement programs, hiring case managers, hiring interpreters, trying to offer the programs that they can, trying to secure the housing that they can. And that's the same support that they're offering both to Afghan humanitarian parolees as to resettled refugees. So at least that's good. The Afghans who are here are going to benefit from the same support as resettled refugees. The various, you know, states across the US are realizing they need to do more, and they cannot just depend on this very limited federal support. Just to give you some idea, every Afghan refugee, like a resettled refugee, gets, I think it's $1,225 per person in the first 90 days. And that's what they can use to spend on rebuilding their lives. In most parts of the country, all of that money does not go to the refugee, that goes to a landlord, because they have to pay their rent. And as you know, rents have become astronomical. And so try and tell me that you can find a place in New Haven for, you know, that amount of money. So in this area, what that means is, you know, refugees maybe get, with their money, 3 months rent covered, you know, maybe a bit more. And that's about it. So some states have been trying to step up. Connecticut has been one of them. I'm here in Vermont, where it's pretty uniquely supportive. Individuals will get 12 months of rent support, or 18 months if they have a family. So the rent will be fully covered. It's a program that exists also for low-income Vermonters, so it's just kind of how Vermont works. But many of our American states are realizing this is not going to, refugee resettlement is not going to work if we don't also invest in integration right now. So that's great, and that's a key message to send along, and to continue to advocate our state authorities to step up. The big challenge, so I just wanted to talk about, you know, finishing this big picture part. 3 of the elements that are impacting, you know, our new JCARR family. So one is there is real legal and family uncertainty for our new Afghan neighbors, right? So while they can benefit from the same support services as resettled refugees, they do not have the legal status and the path to a green card and citizenship. So in their 2 years after being kind of released into the community, they need to have applied for some form of a legal status. So there are some who have the special immigrant visa already. There are others who are eligible for it, and there are many who are not. And so at the moment, that would mean applying for asylum, which, as you know, was also destroyed by the previous administration and is seriously dysfunctional and backlogged. So that would require serious legal assistance in order to construct your story and hope that you get a chance for asylum. And you're not going to be able to reunite your family until you get that legal status. So even if you have that special immigrant visa, you're still going to have to reunite your family. And if you're applying for asylum, you're first going to have to get through that process. So many of our new Afghan neighbors do not want to think about this, because the idea that they sacrificed their lives to, you know, be an ally of the United States, and the United States chooses to do nothing to reunite their families, is just too hard. And with the situation they're facing in Afghanistan is too impossible for them to imagine. There might be some hope. I mean, this is what I've been hearing in from national advocates that the Asylum Adjustment Act has bipartisan support in Congress and very strong support from the Biden administration. So as we know, you never understand when something will get through Congress. Maybe it'll be some continuing resolution or some amendment to something. But if you have any contacts with your congressman or senator, do let them know that you want the Asylum Adjustment Act to be passed as a priority, because that will put all of our humanitarian arrivals on the same path as resettled refugees. So it's a struggle. It's also questions that JCARR itself is asking, you know, I mean, how much energy can we put into helping this family reunite, helping the husband get his special immigrant visa or another visa, help the wife apply for asylum. And I mean, first and foremost on their mind is to be reunited as a family. And if not, at least to feel like they have some normal routines, even if they're just connecting together over WhatsApp and meeting JCARR over WhatsApp and with a bunch of photos. So that's a big stressor. Second big stressor is financial. So as I said, the United States federal government offers very little financial support for our resettled refugees, and many progressive places are really unaffordable and need to address those issues if they want to be welcoming. And as I said, everyone has left someone behind, and they are really facing dire circumstances. So they want to do anything possible to make money. They want to work, but that means they're going to have to face the challenges of poverty in the United States and hunger for their family back in Afghanistan. So it is going to require a lot of effort on our part to make sure that all of our new Afghan neighbors find a financial support system, find work, and well-paid work. So there's going to be a lot of effort there. And the last challenge I wanted to mention is about trust. So again, you know, for many resettled refugees, getting the ticket to move to the United States is the American dream, is that golden ticket. You know, for many of our Afghan neighbors, they are here because we were there, right? There's a complicated relationship with the United States. Even though they know the United States quite well, they've worked with Americans, it helped to build Kabul as a city. You know, this is not the place they wanted to be. And they have spent 4 to 5 months getting deeply acclimated to Americans by hanging out with a bunch of, you know, 18 to 22-year-old soldiers on military bases, but in really very difficult situations. So they're already coming with, as I said, very mixed, very complex emotions, huge amount of stress, real fear, real feelings of insecurity, because they were living in very unsafe circumstances, particularly for women. And they need to find people that they can trust. So they need to be connected with Afghan Americans, people who can speak Dari and Pashto, but also people that they can connect to, Americans that they know will continue to be there for them, and that are making that longer term commitment. And I think about JCARR's new family. Can you, I mean, imagine being a single mother with four children under your responsibility. I mean, how are you going to handle childcare, right? I mean, I don't think any mother in Connecticut, a single mother in Connecticut with 4 children under COVID would know how they're going to handle. Now imagine not speaking English, not knowing why you're here, what you're doing, what you can do. So yes, that involves providing support, but also really trying to rebuild that trust. And that's what JCARR is trying to do. As the Jewish Community Alliance for Refugee Resettlement, you know, JCARR knew we had to do something to help Afghans. JCARR is really, in my mind, the most experienced co-sponsorship group of IRIS in Connecticut, with so many families that they've been supporting, of 6 previous families. So yes, JCARR knew that they needed to step in and support a family, and it's amazing how quickly JCARR has been able to find great, well-located housing, to be able to take a family that is separated, where the mother is really pre-literate, you know, has difficulty in her own native language, with, in addition to no knowledge of English and no work experience from Afghanistan, and no idea how she's going to handle these 4 children. But, you know, JCARR was prepared, did a lot of trainings with their new leaders, recruited new volunteers, and new volunteers are still welcome and needed. But JCARR also has been a longtime supporter of IRIS and knows where IRIS needs that extra help. And I think that's where co-sponsorship is really one of the best things that you can do. You know, a lot of people want to donate furniture or clothes, but I've seen even here, you know, at some point you have enough clothes. You know, at some point you have enough shoes. You don't need a 3rd microwave, but you don't know anybody and you don't know anything, and you can get a nice clean presentation from a caseworker and you still don't understand how to do it, and you still are scared of going to that appointment and signing up for that course, and you just don't have someone that you can trust. And that's what JCARR can provide. And it's, as the JCARR leaders can attest, it is a lot of relationship building and trust building, a lot of explaining, a lot of, you know, intercultural learning. As we learn, you know, I was just past week discovering that leftovers are seen as unhygienic by many Afghans. And so if you serve someone leftovers, they think that they're going to get sick, and that, you know, I didn't know, I didn't want to be insulting, but at the same time, oh my gosh, this makes feeding people so much harder if you can't feed them leftovers, right? So it is a constant learning and challenge, but by continuing to be there month after month, that family gets to really understand what they're learning, and they get to become more and more autonomous. And yes, they struggle, but they will start to do many things on their own without even us knowing. And they're going to be more confident for the struggles here in the United States. So what you can do, JCARR has a great set of committees with leaders who, you know, are welcome to also have new core volunteers who join in that leadership role. But even if you don't want to be a leader, JCARR's committees will find things for you to do because they're very well organized in all areas. I know that employment and cultural orientation and transportation are always could use additional support. This is a family that's also going to have lots of education and childcare needs. So, you know, these things might not feel like the most thrilling thing to tell your friends about that you're doing as volunteering. Hey, I drove this person to the hospital, or I, you know, babysat their child. You know, you don't need a PhD to do that. But that's really what they need, because they don't have that support network, and they're really just getting used to life here. You can also, of course, donate to JCARR, and in this case, as Maddie was saying, you know, this is a family that is going to have major financial needs, while they're also being accompanied to autonomy and hopefully reunited as soon as possible. But you know, JCARR is going to continue to have those conversations with the family and not run away because it's scary and they hear those needs, and they will continue to communicate that out to the different synagogues through our synagogue contact points. So those are the ways that you can support through JCARR. But if anyone has other questions about, you know, what the US is facing, what Afghans are facing, or what you can do, I'm happy to answer.
So if you'd like to ask a question, why don't you do the raised hand icon in the reactions area, so I'll know that you have either a question or a comment for Thomas. And I'm sure, I don't see any hands yet, but I'm sure we have questions or comments.
And you also have the real JCARR experts here, but
Yes.
particularly Jean. We have to acknowledge that on most of your questions, Jean probably has the answers, not me.
Jean, do you want to say anything at this point? Or do you want to wait for questions?
I just want to thank Thomas, because I always say I met a guy, right? I mean, I met Thomas when I really was trying to figure out where's JCARR going to go from here, and Thomas understands the big picture.
Mhm.
He has knowledge about the big picture, but he really understands, who we are and what we're trying to do in New Haven. So I'm extremely grateful, extremely grateful. And also thank you all for having this session tonight.
And Maddie, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to thank you, Thomas, for a very interesting, informative, and certainly a timely presentation. That I just wanted to mention that HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society that has been, in existence forever, asks synagogues across the country to hold a HIAS Shabbat in the month of March. So it's very fortuitous that Thomas gave this presentation here at Becky tonight. So Becky has fulfilled that request. And I also just want to say that HIAS is a global Jewish organization whose mission is to aid and help refugees and displaced persons wherever they are, whomever they are, and that JCARR is very much in line with that mission and is doing that work today right here in New Haven, Connecticut.
Margie?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. After watching the State of the Union address last night, I was very sad to hear the way the pundits after the president's speech were blaming Biden for what's going on as far as the refugees. And it was so distressful. It's not just this is an American problem. We've been doing this for, the stories of refugees being turned away on boats coming over here during World War II. It's a travesty. Do you see any change in human compassion in this, which it seems to be just at an absolute zero?
Yeah, so my background
government.
was as a researcher on immigration issues, and I also looked at public opinion. And you have a definition of what is a refugee, right? That you had a very clear vision looking to history. And the sad thing is that most people don't really know what a refugee is or what a migrant is. And so they fill that term with whatever comes to their mind. And but the news can really shape how they see a refugee. And so for example, I think it's something like, either 2/3 or 3/4 of Americans support Afghan refugee resettlement, extremely high numbers among the military, because their reality of those lucky few getting out of Afghanistan is that these were the leaders of Afghanistan, and these were our allies. These are people who made huge sacrifices in the name of democracy, and who are really going to be invested in our democracy. And they are, as I said, veterans, nurses, lawyers, officials. I've met 2 young women here who were part of a collective called Art Lords, who painted murals across Kabul on the anti-bomb walls that were put up. with messages of hope and peace and women's rights. I mean, so when the public hears that, they realize, oh, those are people that I need to help protect and support. And so it's really important to continue to communicate that's who these people are, and that they are putting in a huge effort to work here, to use their skills here, to learn English. We need to, yes, pay attention to their needs, but also really communicate their strengths and their achievements, because that's what the public needs to hear. You know, and that's what I was saying at the beginning. That's the funny thing of what's going on now with Ukrainians who have to flee, are going to those Eastern European countries that have been the most xenophobic against Syrian refugees. But now something like 90% of Poles say we need to be allowing all of the Ukrainians into Poland, right? So it might seem weird that just a year ago, the Polish military border guards were shooting at refugees on that same border, but now they say we are part of the you know, democratic movement against Putin, and we will support you. So unfortunately, people don't really know who refugees and migrants are. And, you know, once you get in this work, I now use this quote from Jean that says, once you know one refugee family, you know one refugee family, because they are all so different. They're as different as all of us are. You know, we will, I think, have many more crises that hopefully our politicians can get the public to understand and get engaged with, so that we will also be able to protect those who need it through resettlement.
I have what's probably a naive question, but particularly for the folks from Afghanistan who helped us in various ways, they helped the US military. I would think that there would be money in the defense budget to help those people escape, you know, the tyranny that they're now facing because of their alliance with us. I mean, they may have already had some trouble, but now they're really screwed because they're allied with us. So I would think that that would be something we'd have in our budget once we go to a country and enlist people to help us, that we would somehow be able to help them. But I don't know what the reality of that is.
Well, I think that there has been quite a spending by the federal government, but the challenge is just logistics, right? I mean, the evacuation was a failure, so there wasn't a sufficient investment in all of the State Department staff that could be processing all of these applications. And now they are still trying to do that. But in case you're not aware, the State Department's immigration services have to be self-funding. So the US has been very skimpy with investing in legal immigration channels. So, you know, also reinvest and many of them were fired under the previous administration. So just like rebuilding all of that knowledge, you can't just throw money at it. It's gotta take time. And because of the failed evacuation, the US is just trying to reestablish its relationships to people in Afghanistan. So starting in mid-March, the US is supposedly going to be restarting evacuation flights from Afghanistan. So there really have not been flights since those ones that we saw back in August. And we didn't have diplomatic relationships. We don't have an embassy in Afghanistan, right? So the US has slowly been, and we had to reestablish trust with the Taliban so that they would allow these people who are clearly very interesting for the Taliban, right, to instead let them leave the country. So there's been big logistical challenges for the US to even reconnect with these people who have visas to come to the United States. But there we have been we have heard that there is going to be a second phase of this Afghan placement program, again, starting mid-March, going through this next year. That will hopefully, we don't know how many and when and who will be prioritized, but hopefully some of those families, like the new JCARR family, will be reunited over these next few months.
Chris, you have your hand raised. Would you unmute?
Hey, Thomas. Thank you for doing this. It was a great talk, so informative. I wanted to know if you knew how many Afghan people are in the New Haven area by chance. And then I'd love to hear about some of your experiences with Afghan refugees in Brattleboro. What's the situation there?
So yeah, I don't know the exact numbers, you know, it's also a little bit confusing to know the people coming in, how many and how closely have links, right? What is going on here? Because from what I've seen, you know, many of the Afghan refugees who've been waiting for months on these US military bases, they've all found someone that they know, right? It might be a distant cousin or a friend of a friend. So it might be that those relationships here in New Haven are weak. At least here, the JCARR family has a very strong relationship through the brother-in-law. So hopefully that's going to mean that the family will settle in New Haven. Vermont is compared to Connecticut is not a very diverse state. We recently had the self-proclaimed only Afghan in southern Vermont be reunited with a childhood friend of his. But you know, what I see here is that while there's a very wide range of, again, educational background, language background, professional background, people here are really excited to get their life going. So they after having 4 or 5 months of complete isolation on the military bases, they don't want to be isolated. They are very open to, if you get to know their interests, you know, what they like to do in their free time, or to relax, or to take advantage of some free opportunity that you can propose. They're quite open to that because they need that. So I would, from my experience up here, everything that you can do to just offer that presence and support will be welcome, even if there's a huge language barrier.
I'm thinking that a lot of people, when they get here, whether they're getting like to the military bases or once they move into another community, you mentioned stress, but I'm also sure that there's a lot of trauma, and I'm wondering what is in place to help people process the wrenching experience of leaving family members, et cetera, and what they've experienced before they came here. Is that something that is addressed?
Well, I think one of the real challenges is that this trauma is ongoing because their families are separated. Mm-hmm. They can't put it aside. Right. And that's, you know, also a challenge for the JCARR family. How can you process that? I think that schools are going to be important, and getting resource people there to the kids in school. And then, you know, through our health partners, trying to find Dari Pashto speakers. But it can also be non-formal therapy, right? It can be just being together with other Afghan women and their children, and just relaxing. So rebuilding that social network can also be a complementary way of digesting your feelings, and in addition to kind of more traditional mental health. I don't know, Jean, if you want to add anything on that, given your experience through JCARR.
JCARR's been sort of struggling with the issue of, and I have my informants who say we should say behavioral health, not just mental health, but we've struggled with this for some years. And we recently had a very good session that I feel like has a lot to do with us. You know, let's work on our understanding of our work with people who might have experienced trauma, and that we can't say, oh, let's get him a therapist. You know, it's not culturally appropriate. So how do we stay aware? When we see something and we know something, what do we do with that? And we actually connected with the Jewish Family Services, who doesn't have experience with refugees per se, but they have experience with trauma, right?
Mhm.
So it's an ongoing process. There's not an answer. You know, honestly, there is no question that people are traumatized. I do know in our current Afghan family, who we really only connected with a couple of weeks ago, that the young teen is already in, I'll say, counseling. He's already, and I don't know who set it up. I don't know how it's happening. I'm just glad to know that it is happening, because he's here without his parents, and we wouldn't know. We wouldn't know how to deal with whatever. Can I bring up one other thing, since there's a little
Absolutely.
silence? I don't even know how to talk about this exactly, but over the years, now we're in our 7th year as JCARR, Jewish Community Alliance for Refugee Resettlement. And the thing that I've come to realize is not only are we a bunch of people who want to help people, but that we really symbolize something,
Mhm.
you know, so that when we stand up and say we are Jews, because we are, but we're willing to help whoever they are, you know, wherever they come from and whatever their situation is. And I feel, I don't know, this has become really important to me, to sort of make noise about that, because even if Ukraine, if you look at Ukraine, who's the Jewish community helping? They're helping the Jews in Ukraine. That will not be where I'm coming from. You know, so I feel like if you're part of JCARR, then you're part of saying a human being is a human being, and we're here to help human beings. And we are Jewish, and we do that because, you know, so I was really happy to get to know Thomas. Thomas is not Jewish, and who cares, you know? So we're able to sort of sit together and talk about our mutual concerns, our mutual, you know, views of things, and hash it out, and how should we move forward, and so on and so forth. You know, it's, you know, we are the Jewish community, but we're not a community in isolation, to me.
Thank you. That's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? Last questions or comments? Thomas, did you have anything, any final words you want to say?
Well, I would
Should we
say
all
thank
move to
you.
Vermont? Should we all come to Vermont and help?
I don't know. Yeah,
No,
exactly.
Jean says no.
We'll have all the climate refugees
Yeah.
from the United States coming up here to wait out the apocalypse. No,
Right.
no. What I would say is that whatever way that you can support JCARR is really important right now, because you know, JCARR is not just supporting this family, but it's still supporting its 6 other families, right? So it is a community, right? And while other JCARR families understand how important it is to welcome an Afghan family, and will understand when there's also other future families in need. You know, JCARR doesn't just say, hey, we finished our time with this family, we've ticked all of the boxes, and now we're gone. No, I mean, integration is a long-term process, and it goes in both ways, right? There are ups and there are downs. And while things get better, they can also get really bad, and you have a new challenge. And so the more the merrier can come on board, so that JCARR can continue to serve all of its families.
Great. Lyndon. Unmute.
Think I do 8 to 9 Zoom meetings a day. You think I would know that by now. Anyway, Thomas, you mentioned 3 months, and I know when I was doing work with immigration stuff in Philadelphia a few years ago, there was a 90-day cap on the amount of aid that families were being given. Does that cap still exist? And how does JCARR or your organization in Vermont work around that? Because clearly 90 days is not enough to get anybody settled. I mean, we're still working with families that came several years ago.
Yeah, so the way I like to explain it is more like a first phase, second phase. So the first phase should ensure that newcomers get signed up for the various services that they need, and get, it's a phase that has a lot of information provision, yeah, a lot of connection to service providers, and that's about it, right? So the whole point is that integration doesn't stop there. If it did, it would end up in poverty. So there are two ways that this longer term, well, three ways that this longer term support can move forward. So the first is from the federal level, which is that there are two federal programs that exist for longer term support. So one is called the Matching Grant Program and the other is called the Preferred Communities Program. And this allows agencies like IRIS to offer longer term case management around two priorities. One is longer term support towards employment, which can include ESL support and other types of training. And the other is based around social inclusion of vulnerable groups or people with particular health needs. And that's very widely defined. So this second phase from the federal government, it kind of moves from, those first 90 days are for everyone, kind of a same package. The second phase is really more needs-based and longer term. Now, how an agency like IRIS chooses to spend all of this money is its own choice. And whether it's offering that kind of longer term support, again, is also their own programming challenge. A second way that longer term integration support can be offered is through the states and through municipalities. And having worked internationally, I can tell you that I am constantly shocked by the low level of ambition of our state governments for promoting integration, because that's actually where a lot of the challenge exists. There are so many state level regulations and poorly designed programs and services and a lack of funding and support. And, we have some of the wealthiest, if you would look at Connecticut as a country, it would be one of the wealthiest countries on the planet. And if you compare it with like, I've seen so many small European countries that actually support people. So that's something that's missing. And at least the Afghan arrivals are making many states realize that they can't depend on the federal government if they want to have some equity. So I see this as something to continue to push in the future. But the third way is through co-sponsorship models like JCARR, having volunteers who say, what, I'm not here for just the fun photo op in the airport and the donations to set up an apartment. I know that I'm signing on longer term. And yes, it's voluntary, right? And no one can hold you to your commitments. But I think this is a much more effective way of mobilizing volunteer and community support, because then like Jean was saying, I mean, these synagogues have made a long-term commitment, and they're based on the well-being and success of all of their families, even years afterwards. So I think that IRIS has done a lot to push this model, and it's spreading now across the United States, and JCARR can continue to push that here in Connecticut. So these are three of the ways that we're not just depending on that basic federal support, but again, asking for support from our agencies like IRIS, our state authorities, and co-sponsorship groups like JCARR will also help get us towards a longer term integration.
Cynthia, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. This was really great. And I just want to say, as most people here know, Becky helped a family pre-JCARR about 10 years ago. And it was very funny today. I was in the Becky office doing things, and two of the kids called, one after the other. I mean, there are still things, even though they are making it financially and they're very well adjusted. One kid, wanted to apply for a summer program, and her mother can't fill out the application. I mean, it's just these little things, but they keep going. But one of the things that my real question was, now that their families came somewhat long ago, are they coming back and helping JCARR? Because one of the kids from our family desperately wanted to volunteer. He contacted IRIS. I contacted the case manager directly. We did everything we could. Here's a college kid who went through your program and he wants to tutor kids, and IRIS was overwhelmed. They do a lot of work and they had no mechanism for helping him to give back. They basically have mechanisms for, middle-class people to volunteer and not for their own products. So I wonder, is JCARR able to do that?
and I did it too late, try to send this kid to JCARR. I was in touch with some people, but it was too late. We really thought Iris was going to come through. So next time we'll just. So is anything happening at JCARR with helping people?
That's
Who,
such a long
graduates.
question, such a long question.
okay.
You know, my first answer is no. Okay. But here's the thing. I was in a Zoom meeting yesterday and my phone rang and I couldn't answer it, right? So I say, I'll call you back. When I called her back and she had sent me a picture, I get really emotional about this, to say, I became an American citizen today.
Oh, yes.
It brought, I don't know what, joy, closure, you know, I don't know what. So here's the thing. There's lots of reasons why they don't help each other. And some of it, I think, might be jealousy. It might be cultural clashes that we don't understand. No, they're not helping each other. But the point is, when family two, who's been here, same family, that, you know, they came on election night 2016, when he calls me and says, Jean, I'm applying for college and I need some help with the FAFSA. I want to celebrate. I think that is so appropriate. You're not asking me for money. You're not asking me to buy you whatever, a microwave. No, it's like my children. Mom, I don't understand. How do I do this? Right? So I don't expect them to help each other yet. It just doesn't enter into the picture to me.
Cynthia's question is, she has somebody who wants to help. So
Well, I had somebody who wanted to help. Yeah.
somebody who, but if you have someone like that who wants to help, is there a way to help them plug in?
Yeah, there's several things about I want to help. You know, one is Iris is swamped. They're so swamped that they're trying to funnel off their people who want to help, funnel them off to us.
Mhm.
Okay, so I've had Zoom meetings with people who say, I want to help. And so then you have to sort of like, what do you call that, sort of, you know, what does it mean to help? What does it mean to help? Does it mean you want to help turn the apartment into a home? Okay, that's fine. We need that help. But what we really need is somebody we can call and say, oh my God, this person just has to go to the emergency room right now. We need a driver right now. Are you available? You know, are you going to be on that list? You know, so are you want to help just for that move in, or do you want to help for 6 months or a year or whatever we need? So that's what it comes down to in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
That's a great answer. I mean, it's very helpful to have the conversation.
One of the things I'm a very blunt person. What can I say? I was on a Zoom with potential volunteers recently, and I said, listen, guys, refugee resettlement is not romantic. You know, getting the phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning that say, my house really smells. I think it's gas. I don't know what it is, but we can't breathe. We got to get out of here. I mean, that's not romantic. But that's what it is. That's our reality. That's what we get. So if you want to be part of that, great.
How about if you
Love not
don't
to take all the calls at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Jean, what about when you don't have heat?
Yeah, when you don't have heat or hot water.
Say that again, when you don't have what?
Heat or hot water for days and days, which
That's
just
right.
happened very recently to one of our families.
Yeah,
and
it
was
did. And
days of-
how should they know what to do? I mean, the one thing, the thrill, I'll say the thrill of being in JCARR is every single day there's a request that we don't know what to do with. Like baffled. And you know what? We figure it out. We just figure it out, because look at all the people on this screen. It's a bunch of people. We're not stupid. We just like say, oh my God, you know, let's figure this out. Let's figure it out. And we do.
Jean, oh, sorry. Go ahead. Well, to answer Cynthia's question, I have the sense that Iris does have a number of people working with them that have been refugees themselves, including our new contact person, who's a fairly recent refugee. So I think who you can tell a little bit more about him maybe, but But I think there is that cycle in some cases of
Yeah,
someone.
I know that some people are hired, but they are, you know,
Oh, not volunteered.
I know they've been doing a huge amount and they've been overwhelmed, and they just have a different way of operating.
Cynthia and I have known each other since day one in JCARR. So yeah, I know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Well, we could probably go on all night, but I do want to release Thomas, who has been so kind as to share his time with us, and to say thank you so much for your informative talk, and thank you everybody for participating. It was really nice to see so many faces from JCARR, and I just want to give a plug for next week's program, which is our in-house epidemiologist, Dan Weinberger, is going to be talking about COVID-19. Where are we now? Now, of course, we planned this about a month ago, so we were in a very different place then, but he's going to be talking about the research that his lab is doing, and he has been working with a couple of labs in Israel as well. So he's going to give us kind of an international perspective on what's happening with COVID. And that's next Wednesday at 7:30. And so if you're interested in that, please join us. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maddie and Jean, for your contributions tonight. And thank you so much, Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Pleasure. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you, Tom.
And thank you, everybody, for all your work too.
Yes, thank you for all your
Yeah.
work.